Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, my dear students. This is Dr. Muhammad Shafiq again, the lecturer in philosophy at Department of Islamic and Pakistan Studies Cust. The course I'm teaching you is called Introduction to Logic, and the course code is PHI 101. Today we are having lecture number 6, and this lecture concerns about nature and definition of logic. So let's move on and see what is the nature and definition of logic. The outline, as I said earlier, of today's lecture consists upon two major themes. First one, the definition of logic. What does logic mean? And then the nature of logic, what logic is all about. So first, let's look into the definition of logic. Generally speaking, logic is defined as a study of those methods and principles which distinguish between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning. Now you might be wondering, what does reasoning mean? Basically, reasoning is something from which we never can get rid of if we are human beings, because as I've been saying that throughout my lectures, that man is the only species which has been blessed with the faculty of intellect, and through this faculty of intellect, by utilizing it properly, man has developed so many things. And one of this development is the development of society. We live in a society. So when we live in a society, we have relationship with each other, and obviously there comes clash of interests or mutual understanding, or whatever you call it. So in order to live a successful life, what we have to do is try to convince other people with our stance or point of view. And man, being a rational animal, has the ability to negotiate and to work out things without using any force, because force or use of force is the peculiarity of barbarians. It's the peculiarity of animals. Man, being blessed with reason and intellect, can talk and negotiate about the matters. So in this regard, all of our lives we are doing reasoning, we are doing arguments, we try to convince each other, no matter whatever setting we are in. We always try to convince each other, we always try to make our point, and this is because we want to be successful in our lives. So that is what reasoning is. It's argument, it's rational argument. is making your point as such that the listener would convince and agree with you, and you tend to get your objective. So that is what reasoning means. Obviously, this reasoning has certain rules and principles. If you remember in the beginning when we were discussing the functions of philosophy, there are two major functions of philosophy. One, to know the reality. The second one, to devise certain principles and rules to live a good life. So logic basically fulfills the second function of philosophy, and it comes up with certain rules and principles of reasoning, of argumentation. By using these rules of arguments and reasoning, we can present our argument more successfully and more logically, so the listener would get convinced and agree. So logic basically the study of those principles and methods which tell us which are the correct arguments or correct reasoning and which are the incorrect reasoning. So if we are following these principles and methods, obviously our reasoning or our argument would be correct and valid, hence acceptable by people. If not so, then obviously our argument won't be accepted and we would not be successful. Another definition of logic is, in the context of philosophy, that it is a branch of philosophy which is considered to be the foundation of philosophy. Logic, although being a branch of philosophy, also provides foundation to philosophy. How is that? Because philosophy is all about using your intellect, using your reasoning and intellect in defining and digging out the reality, search for the truth, and also devising certain principles, such as moral principles, such as legal systems. So we need logic, or we need these principles of logic even for philosophy itself. In that way, logic provides the foundations of philosophy. In other words, if a particular philosophy is not logical, it's not reasonable, it's not rational, then it won't be accepted by anyone. So for any theory, any philosophy, in order to be accepted, must be logical. Hence, philosophy stands upon foundations which are provided by logic. There are certain other definitions of logic, such as logic is the study of reflective thinking. This particular definition was proposed by Susan Stebbing in her work, A Modern Introduction to Logic. She made some progress with another philosopher called H.W. Joseph, who regarded thought in its unqualified sense as the main theme of logic when he wrote Introduction to Logic. However, the fact is that one has to concede in both the cases that content of logic is essentially psychological, and what is psychological is invariably subjective. This probably be quite confusing for you guys at this stage, but I'm sure on later stages you'll be able to grasp these ideas. So for the time being, you just need to remember another definition of logic, which says it's a study of reflective thinking. By reflective thinking, we mean you need to reflect upon thinking as well. There are certain rules and principles of thinking, and we need to reflect upon these. And that is what the task of logic is. That is why some people define logic as the study of reflective thinking. Some other people would call logic as the science of inference. What does it mean? As you know, science is a systematic body of knowledge. What does inference mean? Inference basically means to deduce, to infer something from another thing. So what logic does is basically it deduces, it infers the conclusion from certain premises, from certain sentences, from certain propositions. We deduce certain other sentences. Like normally, for example, when we say that when there is no teacher, or when the teacher does not come, there is no class. So when someone says that teacher is not in today, it is obvious, it is deduced, it is inferred that there wouldn't be any class today. This is what inference means. So logic is the science of inference in this context. Another definition would say that logic is the study of, or logic is basically the distinction between good argument and bad argument. Again, as I said earlier, that logic is the study of those methods and principles which distinguish between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning. That equates good argument and bad argument. Correct reasoning would be always good argument, while incorrect reasoning would be a bad argument. And if an argument is bad, that won't be accepted. And if it is not accepted, that means you cannot achieve your objective. So logic is the distinction between good argument and bad argument. Now let's turn towards the nature of logic. What is logic? Some people say that logic is science, and some people call it as an art. So what is logic basically? If you know, logic basically, science basically is a systematic body of knowledge. What does it mean? Science has a proper methodology, a systematic method through which it gains knowledge. So all those bodies of knowledge which have a system in gaining knowledge are called sciences, such as physics has a systematic methodology of gaining knowledge about matter and energy. That is why it's called science. Sociology has a specific methodology of gaining knowledge about society or disseminating knowledge about society. That is why it's called science. So Generally speaking, science is defined as or considered as the systematic body of knowledge, and if we apply this definition on logic, then we can see that logic is considered to be a science. Rather, it is considered to be a science of science, as it gives us those principles which are essential, which are quite necessary for the attainment of correct knowledge in a systematic way. So, in this context, we can say logic is a science. Also, it is the body of systematic knowledge itself. While concentrating upon principles of reasoning in a systematic way, in a coherent way. That is why some people consider logic as a science. On the other hand, there are certain philosophers and logicians who would consider logic as an art. What is an art, by the way? Art is something which deals with certain basic skills in a given situation. An art is something which is the name of basic skills such as making a brick or erecting a building, such as drawing a sketch or a painting or maybe singing a song. So all these things, all these trades need certain skills, and that is why these things are called an art. Erecting a building is an art. Singing a song is an art. Drawing a sketch is an art. So if we look closely to logic, by applying this definition of art, it will lead us to conclude that logic is an art as well. Because logic is a skill which deals with the correct deduction or inference of thinking at the correct time and in the correct situation by following certain rules and principles of thinking. So, logic, by using the principles and methods of correct reasoning, tries to convince other person. It becomes a skill because it's an art. It's an art to convince other people. You might have seen this. I hope not in your real life, but in movies or dramas, that the more skillful a lawyer is, the more successful he is in the court. So it's all about skills. And these skills, when served by the correct principles, the principles and methods of logic, that would excel. So in this context, we can say logic is an art as well. That shows how important logic is. So no matter whether it's science or art, logic is quite important for us, being a part of philosophy, being a systematic body of principles of gaining knowledge. We need to study logic, and without logic it's not possible to get valid knowledge. So this is the nature and definition of logic. And again, these are the books highly recommended for the study of logic and philosophy. So do get hold of these books, and also do get in touch with me if you have any questions, or if you want any further explanation of anything which you couldn't grasp. Please do ask me, and I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Till next lecture, take good care of yourself and your loved ones, and I would say thank you very much, and Allah Hafiz for now.